If you watched the previous episode, don't worry, my blood pressure has lowered significantly. Doctors told me it is normal. But on a serious note, we need to look at the direction for Devils. Is it time to fire Lindy Ruff? Are they buyers? Are they sellers? We have a lot to discuss on today's episode of Locked On Devils. Buckle up, everybody.
You're Locked On Devils, your daily podcast on the New Jersey Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, this is Bryce Salvador, and you're Locked On Devils with Trey Matthews.
Scores! Oh, Stevens stepped up, nailed him. Brodor's got the puck. What a shot. The Devils win the Stanley Cup.
Alrighty now, what is up, New Jersey? Welcome back to the Locked On Devils podcast here on Locked On Network. I'm your host, college hockey play-by-play announcer, Devils Wire for Pucks and Pitchforks, and also part-time credential media member, Trey Matthews. Okay, before we talk about the bad surrounding the New Jersey Devils and what the future holds for them, first, some good news. I will be accompanying the Devils on their upcoming California trip. I am credentialed for the games in Anaheim and also Los Angeles. So if you see me roaming around the Honda Center and also Crypto.com Arena, which, by the way, it'll always be called Staples Center, don't be afraid to come up and say hi. It's my first time in the Los Angeles area. Looking forward to it. Always wanted to go out to LA and experience the bright lights, and I'm really excited for it. And thanks to Game Time, I actually snagged myself some basketball tickets when the LA Lakers are set to play the Denver Nuggets. I get to see the Joker take on King James, and I'm also really looking forward to that. So shout out to Game Time. But let's talk about the state of the Devils, because over the weekend, they won a game against the Montreal Canadiens, but they lost the very next game against the Tampa Bay Lightning. And the game against the Canadiens, it wasn't really their best effort. And then against the Lightning, they were going up against a backup goalie. They were struggling to generate shots, and it seemed like the Devils had lost their momentum. And then the chatter about fire Lindy Ruff just became even bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point where I have to discuss it on this show yet again. So in the first segment, I will give my thoughts as to whether or not the Devils are buyers or sellers. I'll list some notable unrestricted free agents. Then in the next segment, I'll talk about the state of Lindy Ruff. What are my personal expectations for him moving forward? And is firing him the best route of action? And then in the third and final segment, I will give my final thoughts as to whether or not the season is over for the Devils, because they might be down, but they're not out, but they need to convince me otherwise that they can go on a heater. Let's begin. Buyers or sellers for the Devils. Here are some notable pending unrestricted free agents: Tyler Toffoli, Tomas Nosek, Chris Tierney, Colin Miller, and Brendan Smith. I'll get back to Tyler Toffoli momentarily, but when looking at Tomas Nosek, Chris Tierney, Colin Miller, and Brendan Smith, I really think the only player that might pique some interest of teams is Colin Miller, because he's been one of the more consistent defensemen for the Devils. We've seen him blossom when he was paired alongside Luke Hughes. It seems like Luke Hughes has learned a lot from him. And as you guys know, I was big on Colin Miller during the course of the offseason. And with the exception of Tyler Toffoli, I think Colin Miller might be the only player that can generate some sort of interest from other teams. Tomas Nosek, I would also say, is in that same department. However, he was out for a good chunk of the season due to injury, and that might scare some teams away. But you can't forget what Nosek did with the Boston Bruins last year, because remember, the Bruins generated the most points and wins in NHL history, and Nosek played a decent role in that because he was on special teams. He was good in the faceoff department. He was good in other metrics, including hits, and that's why I was excited when Tomas Nosek joined the Devils. And as for Chris Tierney, I expected for more of him to be help for the Utica Comets, but other circumstances played into his favor, and that's why he is now on the NHL roster. And for Brendan Smith, I don't think any teams are going to be interested in him at all. And quite honestly, I'm okay if the Devils keep him, but they just got to utilize him correctly. I don't think he's good as a defenseman. You got to use him as a forward, because let's face it, this Devils team is sometimes as soft as Charmin tissue paper. And the only player that could be somewhat physical and give the opponent some sort of headache is Brendan Smith, because we saw what happened when Jonas Siegenthaler tried to go toe-to-toe with Matt Rempe. And at this point, I think Rempe's goal is to fight every single team during his time in the NHL, which I respect to an extent, but you don't want to become a goonhead. Now, let's talk about the interesting piece, which is Tyler Toffoli, because I've done an episode centered around the future of Tyler Toffoli not too long ago, because Toffoli, like I said, similar to a lot of these other players I listed, he's a pending unrestricted free agent. He is currently leading the Devils team in goals, and for a struggling Devils power play unit, he's been like the only bright spot, because the Devils only have like 3 or 4 power play goals in their last God knows how many attempts, and Tyler Toffoli is at the helm of it. And given the state as to where the Devils are at, I'm sure there's a lot of teams that would be interested in the services of Tyler Toffoli. But at the same time, I think Tom Fitzgerald is trying to sign him to a new contract. Now, what would that contract look like? How expensive would it be? And is Tyler Toffoli really a guy that can be a part of this Devils team for years to come? Well, I recently got to speak in a Twitter space conducted by Brad Pack, and he was joined alongside Ryan Novozinski of NJ.com and also James Nichols of New Jersey Hockey Now. And I asked both Novo and James, what do they think the Devils are going to do with Toffoli? Because that's sort of a wild card when it comes to the Devils being buyers or sellers. Here are their thoughts on the matter. Get your guys' thoughts on, like, are they buyers or are they sellers? Because you got to factor in Tyler Toffoli, pending unrestricted free agent, and things like that. How do they go about this? If I can ask you guys that.
I wrestle with trading Tyler Toffoli because, I happen to know that they really like him in the organization, and they really like him for Jack Hughes' wing when things are going well. And he's also the team's leading goal scorer. I think they do see a fit. Term might be an issue when that conversation does come up. I know that, Fitz and Toffoli's agent are in constant contact about it, but I do also know that Ryan's already shipping him off to Edmonton, so I don't really know.
Whoa, what?
But no, I mean, look, it's a situation where this team, in my opinion, believes that they could sneak in. I don't necessarily see them selling off. I could be wrong, but if you ask me, I don't see them selling. Do they buy? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, I'm of the belief that they will. And in terms of, is it the defense or is it the goaltending? I think it would be unwise to eventually not get a goaltender. We all believed in Schmid last year. We saw how that went. I'm on the record saying that I do believe Dawes is the future. I do think that also he needs a good running mate to go with him. So, we'll see. I don't think it would be wise to not get a goaltender at some point, either March 8th or beyond. But that's my take on it. I'm a little. It's a tough situation.
Here's the thing. Okay.
Here it goes.
Lay it on.
Is he doing like an Italian like TV show accent or something like that?
No,
that's my shtick. That's my shtick.
That is just my voice. So listen, it's like the Lindy thing, right? Like I talked about earlier. They might not have a choice in the next couple of weeks. If they suck, if they go on a freezer in this West Coast road trip and things get even worse than they are right now, why not trade Toffoli and get some assets out of that, right? Like, especially if, I know he's not a center, obviously, and the centers have been the one that really have gotten, some of these ridiculous like packages this season. But this is like James said, the leading goal scorer in the Devils, and a guy that he's one of those big, like one of the reasons the Devils that we say are a momentum based team is because of Tyler Toffoli, because he can turn on. When he's on, he is on. When he's off, he's not a great skater, and he doesn't really get in his positions well. I think, but if it comes down to it, you roll off and the tires really come off here. Yeah, like there's a lot of people to pay coming up. You got not only do you have Dawson Mercer to pay, not only do you have Luke Hughes to pay, you got 2 goalies to pay too. And obviously those will probably be a little like smaller contracts than to start out, but you that might not be a luxury you can really afford at this point, moving forward. And he's getting up there in age. I think his game will age well, and it has aged well. but it's, you might have to consider it if things get really bad here.
Yeah, like if the conversation right now is that Toffoli wants to sign for like 7 years, I don't think you do it. I think that's when they turn around and say like, okay, sorry, that's not the fit. But if it's like 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 max, you go into that knowing that maybe years 4 and 5 are going to look bad. But I think he's got like some pretty good chemistry with Jack, for years 1 to 3 of that deal looking good. So it really is depending on the situation type thing with Toffoli right now.
Okay, so here's my stance on it. I think this is the time where Tom Fitzgerald really needs to get an answer from Tyler Toffoli and his agency, because I know Fitzgerald has been talking about it a few weeks ago, in which he said that he wants to re-sign Tyler Toffoli, and he's been having talks with his agent about the matter, but they still have not come to an agreement, obviously. But the thing is like, if Tyler Toffoli does not want to re-sign with the Devils, then why not trade him away for some solid pieces in return? Because unlike the other players I listed, Tyler Toffoli can still generate a decent amount of interest, especially for a team that has their eyes set on the Stanley Cup. Because the thing about Tyler Toffoli, is he the fastest skater? No. Is he the most physical skater? No. Is he the most polarizing player? No. But he is a very smart and dynamic player because he knows where to place himself. He knows where to find those open lanes. He knows how to shoot. And at some points during the season, he actually fits in quite nicely with someone like Jack Hughes or Jesper Bratt, because both those players have speed to burn. They're very creative when it comes to handling the puck. But Tyler Toffoli has to use his mind in order to fit in with the Devils, and he's fit in like a glove. Like I said, he's leading the Devils team in goals, and he's also been very effective on the power play, a power play unit that has been struggling since the beginning of January. But digressing a little bit, and to add on to that, Toffoli is a former Stanley Cup champion with the LA Kings back in 2014. And similar to why the Devils brought him on board, I think you can convince teams to try to take him on. Now, you're probably wondering, what do I want the Devils to do with Toffoli? Well, similar to what James said during the Twitter space at one point, it really depends on the length of his contract, because if he's demanding for a 7-year deal, yeah, no way in hell that's going to happen for the Devils, because the Devils have other priorities in terms of re-signing guys, because you got to factor in Dawson Mercer. He still does not have a deal in the works. Then you got some of these other guys like Shimon Nemeth and Luke Hughes. Their entry-level contracts are going to be over before you know it, and you don't want to be up in debt to your eyeballs. And Tom Fitzgerald has to be somewhat smart about it. And I'm sure he's like, look, we would love to have Tyler Toffoli back for a multi-year extension, but 7 years is just something we cannot do. My thing is, can Fitzgerald convince Toffoli and his agency that he needs to buy into the system, and he sort of needs to take a pay cut in order to play ball, because he gave the same lecture to Jesper Bratt. That's actually worked out quite nice for Devils. He was an all-star this season. And then for Timo Meier, he has dealt with injury. But like I said in a recent episode, I still think that Timo Meier will be worth it in the long run for the Devils. And I think that's what Fitzgerald is trying to do with Toffoli, which is, do you want to be a part of something special? Do you want to build on this success for years to come? Well, you're going to have to play ball, and you're going to have to take some of it a pay cut. Now, I don't really know what's going on behind closed doors in terms of these contract negotiations, but it's getting to a point where you really need a definitive answer from Toffoli, because if his heart is not with New Jersey, you need to trade him ASAP, because the trade deadline will be here before we know it. And if he does want to re-sign with the Devils, great. Hold on to him and try to start this all over again come next year. Final verdict, I want Tyler Toffoli back, but it has to be for the right price, and the Devils have to weigh their options here. Do they see themselves as a playoff team? Do they see themselves as a team that might need to wait until the offseason to start from scratch and go back to the blueprint and just see what was working, what was not working, and go from there? We'll see what happens, but I think Tyler Toffoli has been a great fit for the Devils. Now, before we continue with today's episode and I talk about Lindy Ruff and his job security, let me tell you guys about Camino Consulting. You've heard of our online families and couples course and taken advantage of Locked On 25% discount running to the end of the month. But what about the live seminars? In both sport and businesses, the challenge in differentiating candidates and recruits in an endless battle. Everyone can demonstrate their measurables and qualifications, but we all know It is the intangibles that matter when those things are similar. Contact Camino Consulting for their team and management seminars. Get a peek behind the curtain and watch the next recruit class of hiring group become one of the most effective you've ever seen, both because you identify the right candidates and because you've learned how to communicate and motivate them in accord with own preferences. But you aren't in a business management or working with a team. You pay referrals. Make some money making your workspace and favorite teams better. Every group works better at the end of the year versus the start of the year. So contact Camino Consulting at caminoconsulting.ca and get on the fast track to understanding. Okay, after the Devils' recent loss to the Tampa Bay Lightning, Lindy Ruff was quoted to say, "I take full responsibility. You want to win. We've dealt with a lot. Players want to win. I'm responsible for the wins and losses." Okay, that's pretty cliche and typical for him to say because you are the head coach. So I really do hope you take full responsibility for the loss, because I've been one of Lindy Ruff's biggest defenders ever since July 2020 when I took over the show. But the thing is like, I don't want to hear all that BS. I actually want to see the Devils go out there and do something. My overall thoughts on Lindy Ruff, like before the start of the season, was that I'd say Lindy Ruff wasn't really given a fair chance, because in his first year with the Devils, that was the 2021 56 shortened COVID season, Devils weren't really all that good. The very next season, Devils started to show somewhat improvement, but they dealt with a lot of injuries, and Lindy Ruff was basically seeing red towards the end of the year because it was basically the Utica Comet show at the Prudential Center. When I analyze Ruff in the present moment, I think one thing that's really gone against him was just the amount of injuries that the Devils have been dealing with, because last year they were a relatively healthy team. They didn't really get all that hurt because Jack Hughes, he only missed 3 or 4 games. Nico Hischier, he only missed 1 game. Jesper Bratt, he suited up in all 82 games. Dougie Hamilton was healthy after recovering from his injury-plagued season during the 2021-2022 season, which made it, I guess, harder for Tom Fitzgerald to part ways with Lindy Ruff, considering the fact that there was so much going up against him, including the injuries, like I just mentioned, and also the COVID procedures. And I said, okay, during the 2022-2023 season, this is Lindy Ruff's time to shine. He's being held to a very short leash, and the Devils really need to start improving because they have way too much talent on this team to be a mediocre unit. And I think Lindy Ruff was given that fair chance. And as a result, the Devils went on a 13-game win streak. They made it to the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And Lindy Ruff was a finalist for the Jack Adams Trophy. And I think that's great and all. But looking at this season now, the Devils have been very inconsistent and they've dealt with some injuries. But I think it just goes back to some of the lineup decisions that Lindy Ruff has made, the things he says post-game, and people making their own inferences as to what's been going on in the locker room. Now, I do have to ask this question for the people that want Lindy Ruff fired, which is, are you looking for a simple fix or are you looking at this long term? What do I mean by that? Well, if the Devils were to fire him right then and there, are you expecting for the Devils to get red hot all of a sudden, similar to what happened with the Edmonton Oilers? I actually talked with Chico Resch about this when he appeared on my show a few weeks ago. And when I brought up the fact that the Oilers went on a 16-game winning streak after firing their coach, he mentioned okay, they got Connor McDavid, they have Leon Draisaitl. To add on to that, they got Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Zach Hyman. Seems like Corey Perry has slid into his role somewhat nicely. He has appeared in 28 games. He has 14 points. And it seems like, well, I was going to say a Connor Bedard joke, but I don't think that's in good faith. Moving on, basically, Chico was saying the Oilers are a different team compared to the Devils. And I do agree with them in some sort of sense. Now, here are my things. If Lindy Ruff has lost the locker room, then you really do need to get a new voice in there. But the thing is if the players are vouching for him, or if they say that's our guy moving forward, Tom Fitzgerald is not going to be stupid enough to fire Lindy Ruff. And something else you need to factor in is he has an extension that kicks in next year, and we don't know how that circumstance is going to pan out. I actually spoke with an NHL writer about this subject back in December. I will leave this person anonymous. And basically, this person said that they were a little concerned for Lindy Ruff, considering the fact that the Devils were inconsistent. They were struggling a bit. and he was just wondering as to whether or not Lindy would be the guy moving forward. And now fast forward to late February, we're almost in the month of March. It's still the same thing. Devils are inconsistent. Doesn't seem like they have any fight back. Seems like they come out lackadaisical for some games. Sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. But it's just like if you want Lindy Ruff fired, then you got to like make a decision. Is it like simple fix or long term? Do you just think he's not the coach long term? And I have no problem if the Devils do go for a head coaching change. Obviously, things just have not been working out. And I had like that epic scream rant in the previous episode, which, by the way, my doctor has told me that my blood pressure is back to normal. Thank you for all your concerns. But digressing once again, I just think for Lindy Ruff, it's just going to come down to like, what direction do the Devils want to head in? Do they see themselves as a playoff team? Do I think Lindy Ruff is going to get fired? I think it's a possibility, but these next few games are going to be crucial for the Devils. If they lose like 2 out of these 3 next games, then quite honestly, he might be gone. If they lose all 3, I would bet my bottom dollar that he'll be gone. But obviously, the final verdict is not up to me. And I think these next upcoming games for Lindy Ruff and company is going to be quite crucial, because if they lose 2 out of the 3 next matchups, then he might be gone. And if they lose all 3, I would bet my bottom dollar that he'll definitely be gone. But that's just my personal opinion, because it's like if he has lost the locker room, if the Devils are gaining no traction, and if they're not responding to anything he's throwing out, then you have no choice but to change up the voice in the locker room. But the thing is like it just because the Edmonton Oilers saw a big surge and went on that lengthy winning streak after making a coaching change, don't expect the same things from the Devils, because what if they stay intact after the trade deadline? Then they still have their goaltending snafu to work out. They still have 2 young, inexperienced defensemen that they got to try to muscle their way through this rookie wall, because the fatigue is starting to set in for both Shimon Nemets and Luke Hughes. And then the Devils are still dealing with a decent amount of injuries here and there. That doesn't really change anything, but maybe a different voice can help. So if you're expecting for a new coach to come in and basically play savior and help the Devils get back to like second or first in the Metro, similar to what happened last year, well, I hate to burst your bubble. I don't foresee that. But if it can just change the culture up a little bit, if it can shake up the locker room, then by all means go for it. But it's really going to come down to these next few games, in my opinion. And that's sort of what I talked about with that NHL writer back in December, which is if the Devils are going on a lengthy losing streak and they're just in a rut and they can't get out of it, you might have no choice but to find a new voice. But the problem is like, as previously mentioned, Lindy's extension doesn't kick in until next season. So would you have to buy him out of his contract in order to fire him? We don't really know. I asked that NHL writer that, and he wasn't really aware of the circumstance either. But that's just some food for thought. But if Nico and Jack, if they want him gone, I think he'd be gone by now. But I think it's going to come down to these next few games. And if the Devils lose all 3, then I would say things are looking a little hot under the seat for Lindy. Before we continue, let me tell you guys about Sleeper. Regardless of where the Devils are at in the current standings, which we'll talk about momentarily, I want to remind you that you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash amount playing daily fantasy hockey. You don't just have to participate in fantasy hockey. You can also play NFL, NBA, MLB, college football, all on the Sleeper app. All you have to do is pick whether studs like Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt, Akira Schmid will record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more. To win a $100 bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 players. You heard me, Devils fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Now, is the season over for the Devils? Well, like I said in the previous segment, let's look at their upcoming trip, and I will be present for 2 of these 3 games. They got the San Jose Sharks later tonight when this episode goes live. Then they got the Anaheim Ducks and also the LA Kings. Now, the Devils are unfortunately in a position where they can't be given the benefit of the doubt because they've lost to all 3 of these teams. But I think they're a better team than the Sharks. I think they're a better team than the Ducks. And if they lose to the LA Kings, then guess what? During this California trip, you racked up 4 of potential 6 points. And when looking at the Metropolitan Division, it's not as bad as people are projecting it to be because the New York Rangers are running away with it. They recently went on a 10-game winning streak. They have 81 points. Then the Carolina Hurricanes, they have 74 points. They're on a 2-game losing streak. The Flyers are on a 2-game losing streak. I'm still a little confused as to what the direction will be for the Flyers because I think they've exceeded expectations. I don't know what they're going to be like come the trade deadline, but we'll talk about that momentarily. Washington Capitals, they have 63 points, and in the 5th position are the Devils with 62 points. The Devils are 5 points behind the 3rd place Flyers, and when looking at the wild card, the separation is starting to get a little larger for Devils, especially in their more recent loss to the Lightning, because now the Devils trail the Lightning by 7 points, and they trail the Red Wings by 8. Yeah, that gap is getting bigger and bigger in the wild card, and now it's a matter of like the Devils are going to have to pick their poison. Which team do they try to pursue after? Do you try to pursue the 3rd spot in the Metro, or do you try to get one of those 2 wild card positions? But the Devils cannot be playing devil's advocate right here. No pun intended. But is the season over is the ultimate question. It's not over, but the Devils haven't convinced me that they can go on a heater. And I think that's the big thing. I want to believe in them. I want to hold out hope for them. But the thing is like, you need to show it because I've been talking about it relentlessly on this show. And I feel like I'm just sometimes repeating myself saying like, oh, let's look at the upcoming schedule. The Devils can rack up a couple points here. They can maybe drop a game here, but they've left a lot of points on the board. As you guys know, losing some of those games that they had no business of losing, like the Ducks, like the Sharks, like the Coyotes, like the Flames, it just makes things all that much harder. And I think another thing that we need to factor in is like, what are the Devils going to do come the trade deadline? Because I talked about in the first segment, they have some decent pending unrestricted free agents, particularly with Tyler Toffoli. And if Toffoli doesn't want to re-sign with the Devils or isn't giving a clear indicator that he wants to resign, then I think the Devils will have no choice but to ship away a few pieces. And the thing is like, if the Devils decide to get somebody to help them and change their ways, I think it could definitely help them in more ways than one, but it depends on the player and depends on what they bring to the table. And I don't think they're going to get a top-notch goalie. I just don't foresee it. I don't see them getting John Gibson. I don't see them getting Jacob Markstrom. I don't see them getting Elvis Merzlikins. It could be possible, but I'm not holding out hope for that. UC Saros is far-fetched. That's not even funny. I just don't think the Devils are going to get a top-notch goalie. They're going to have to roll with Nico Dawes and possibly Vitek Vanecek going the rest of the way once Vanecek returns from injury. But the Devils just need some more physicality. They need more defensive awareness because I think if they had more depth defensively, then you could possibly sit Luke Hughes for like a game or two because he obviously needs a breather. He's feeling it right now. And that's not a knock on him. It's just like the college season is way shorter than the NHL season, and the mistakes that he makes in college, he could get away there, but he can't get away with it with the best of the best in the NHL. It's not going to happen. And I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but it seems like Luke Hughes has been pressing a little bit, and it seems like he gets knocked off the puck somewhat easily, or sometimes he's holding his own. Sometimes he's like his brother putting on razzle dazzle, but I think Luke Hughes needs a bit of a breather. But unfortunately, like Lindy said, there's not really many options to go to. And I think looking at the trade market, looking at some available defensemen or someone who could just bring some more physicality and energy to the team, like Matt Rempe, for example. Like, I'm sure a lot of people are hating Rempe and what he does. And quite honestly, what he did to Nathan Bastian, I didn't like. But I think Rempe is one of those players, like, you love him on your team, but you hate to go up against them. Or look at someone like Tom Wilson, who's been doing it for years. Or Corey Perry. There's a reason why he's nicknamed the Worm, because he gets underneath his opponent's skin. He's notorious for doing so. Ryan Reeves. There's the list goes on with players that are not afraid to tussle and ruffle up some feathers. And I think that's what's missing from Devils roster. They're missing that energizer. They're missing some chemistry. And I think they could get it at the trade deadline. But I think that main domino piece that they need to focus on is Tyler Toffoli, because if he says he doesn't want to re-sign, Devils have no choice but to become sellers. That's my stance as to what this season looks like for Devils moving forward. They're not out of it, but they're making it harder on themselves. And these next few games are going to be very crucial because it'll determine which direction the Devils have to go in, because the trade deadline will be here before we know it. It's just a little over a week away. What's going to happen with Lindy Ruff and what's going to happen with the structure moving forward. Let me know what you guys think. Do you think the Devils should be buyers or sellers? Do you want Lindy Ruff fired? I probably already know the majority of the answers. And do you think this season is over for the Devils? Leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts. If you're listening on a podcast streaming service, hit me up on my personal X Page app at TreyMatt4 or the show's X Page app at Locked On Devils. As for today's episode, that's all the time I have for you. So continue to stay safe. Have a wonderful day in New Jersey. Go Devils. I'll catch you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening once again.